Wednesday, December 30th, 2020, and we are just on the cusp of ending 2020, which I know a lot of people are excited. We're also excited because joining me today is the amazing James Withrow, and we're going to talk about redistricting today and the different constraints during this process, specifically with counties. And this is going to kick off a new series of live sessions we're going to have throughout the course of this process over the next several months and weeks. And so we're really excited, James, to be talking to you today and what you have to share with everybody with this analysis. And joining also is Robert Norris, part of our Indivisible TX Lege organizing team, education huddle lead, budget master and extraordinaire, and all other things in Indivisible TX Lege that are happening right now. So, gentlemen, great to see both of you this morning.
Thanks, Alex. Always a pleasure to talk with you all.
Well, really excited about the session that we have today, James, and what you've prepared. Like we said, this is going to kick off a new series for us, the topics in Texas redistricting. And part one is going to be county rule constraints on Texas House gerrymandering. So take it away for us, James. Share with us the information that you've prepared for today.
Oh, there we go. So yeah, this would be the first thing I had to say. We're going to go into mostly talking about we're almost all completely talking about redistricting the Texas House and how the county rule that the state of Texas, that the Constitution of the state of Texas imposes on the redistrictors. So that's going to be what I'm going to be talking about today. There are other topics in Texas redistricting that I'd love to go into, a little bit on the Voting Rights Act and how that impacts redistricting. Certainly how the recent elections have impacted what the will likely be. But today, today we're going to be talking about the county rule. And the county rule, I'll get to the specifics of the county rule in just a second, but I just wanted to go very quickly over a couple of other points, including who redistricts. And the state legislature is going to get the first crack at this. The governor can veto bills that come out of the state legislature on redistricting. If the state legislature doesn't get it done, usually in the regular session, then it goes to the legislative redistricting board. There is, I have heard that in the laws having to do with this, that it says that the legislature is supposed to do it the first session where they get the census figures. And so if the census figures are late, there may be a loophole there and they can call it a regular session. And that seems to be what the legislature is planning on doing, and pretty good chance that's what they'll do. Texas has an unusual rule, though, that if the legislature doesn't pass redistricting for the legislature itself, then the legislative redistricting board will do it. And the LRB includes the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the House, the land commissioner, the comptroller, and the attorney general. This is an unusual rule, but I think it's a really good one because it provides an incentive for the Texas House and the Texas Senate to get redistricting done. The reason that it came into existence, I think it was post World War II, right about that time period, is that the House and the Senate just hadn't done their job, and they actually hadn't done redistricting. So this kind of provides an incentive that if they don't do it, then some other body is going to do it. And so you know, all these politicians, you know, they want to have control over their own districts, and so there's a real incentive for them to get it done. And so there probably will be a special session, and they probably will come up with maps. Almost all the maps then go into the courts, and some of the maps then are changed a little bit here, a little bit there, but for the most part, the legislature's map is going to be what is going to rule. with just some fine distinctions. And then if any future Texas legislature can redistrict if it wants to. It doesn't have to, but it only has to for the right after the census, but it could redistrict in a future session.
And James, I want to highlight some of that you talked about, because we heard from some of our partners that if the legislature doesn't redistrict, the census data does come too late. You talked about some of those potential outcomes. One of those is that we could see redistricting happen again in the legislature for 2023, based on, that could be some of the arguments that people make if it doesn't happen in time during the regular legislative session for 2021. Is that what you're indicating there, or is this a different outcome that you're hearing as well?
Yeah, well, you'll notice that the governor has an impact on what the state legislature does, but the governor is not part of the LRB. So the governor would prefer that the maps come out of the state legislature rather than the LRB. I think this was also very smart, and the governor can't just veto maps, hoping to also, if the governor were on the LRB, then he could just veto maps and hope he gets a better chance in the LRB. But he doesn't have any impact on what the LRB does. So my guess is that both the legislature and the governor will want to call a special session, and the governor calls special sessions, and that the governor will want to do that for redistricting, and that the LRB will probably just let them do it. I don't think they'll step in. I don't think courts would step in either. So as long as they get it in a quick special session, they'll probably be able to do it. And then only then, if they weren't able to do it, would it end up with the LRB. That's my guess.
Thanks, James.
So just the basics, the districts within a state have to be pretty much equal in population. 1% for congressional districts is what the federal courts have ruled, and 10% for state legislative districts. So 10% is a lot, but that doesn't mean that you can be too clever about that 10%. There can be kind of naturally occurring differences in population, but the Republicans couldn't draw maps where all the Republican districts are smaller than all the Democratic districts. The courts would strike that down. There can't be a pattern to it. Or if like Hispanic districts were all had many more people than Anglo districts. Can't do that. But if they're just kind of naturally occurring differences in the population of districts up to 10%, that's okay. But 10% is the limit. Districts also need to conform to Voting Rights Act requirements, and that impacts a lot of districts here in Texas. I'll probably mention that once or twice today, but it really, I'll go into that in more detail, maybe in a future presentation. And then Texas and almost all states require districts to be contiguous. And contiguous just means that, if you put one county into a district, the only other counties that can go in that district are counties adjacent to it. You can't have, some district where part of it is in Dallas and part of it is in Austin and then nothing in between. If you're going to draw Austin and Dallas into the same district, there has to be a connecting line of precincts and voters between the two. So there are a couple states that don't require contiguous districts, but it's just kind of an odd fact. Okay, so I'm going to be using at times, when I say 2010 in this presentation, I mean the 2010 census. But I'm also going to be talking about 2020 estimates, and the estimates that I'm going to use are January 1st estimates done by the Texas Demographic Center at University of Texas at San Antonio. I think these estimates are probably the closest to what population is in various places in Texas. But if the Texas Demographic Center, if their estimates were actually correct and were better than the 2020 census, which would we use? Even if all demographers in the whole country thought that the Texas Demographic Center did a better job than the census, guess who we're going to use?
Sounds like the census.
The census, exactly. So the census, whether it's good or bad, that's what we're going to use. So, and the next slide I'm gonna use is the actual constitutional language for the county rule, and I'm going to pop it up here. Just skim it. Don't feel like you need to understand it. In fact, because I'm going to keep going back to all 4 sections time and time again in this presentation. And if you understand it when you first read it, then the rest then it's going to be boring later. So it'll be actually better if it just kind of it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the next. I'll give you like 30 seconds to read this. Okay, so probably clear as mud. There's all the legal language. And before we go into more, I just want to say a couple things. First of all, everything that I'm going to be talking about have been the rules that Democrats and Republicans have used since 1971. And so not only is it the constitutional language, but I feel there's a norm there that would probably not be violated. And so with maybe a small exception or two, what I'm going to tell you is the way it's been done since 1971. During the 60s, there were a couple of changes in the way that redistricting was done. Before the Baker v. Carr Supreme Court decision, some districts had wildly different populations than others, like 10 to 1, not just 10%, but 10 to 1. Harris County up until the 60s, into the 60s, had like 1 Senate district, even though population of that Senate district was 10 times the smallest. Baker v. Carr changed that. And so the Democratic legislators who drew the maps for the 70s, they actually went a little too far, and they tried to make every district exactly or very much or pretty close to exactly have the same population. And there was a Supreme Court case here in Texas Supreme Court case, Smith v. Craddock, where the Supreme Court said, you don't have to do it to that degree. 10% is good, and you need to keep the county rule without violating the 10%, the federal mandate. But the 10% federal mandate, that takes precedence over the county rule. But you have to do the county rule unless it violates the 10%. Does that make sense? Kind of, sort of? All right. And maybe it'll make more sense as we go through.
Following you so far.
What's that?
Following you so far.
Okay, good. And just as a side note, the Craddock in this is in this decision from 1971. Guess what relationship that Craddock has to the one who's representative of Midland now?
It's the same one.
It's the same guy. He's been in the
guy.
legislature since 1969.
Yep.
And he didn't like how the Democrats had done the 70s redistricting. He and other Republicans sued, and they won their case. So This comes out of a Republican-led court case, really. And it's the same guy. Yeah, he's been there forever. Okay, so this is the first section. A county with sufficient population for exactly 1 district must be formed into a single district. This means 1 county, 1 district. And so some of the districts, every time they redistrict, may fall into this category. 1 county has sufficient population. What does sufficient population mean? Well, you take in 2010, they took the Texas population, which was just over 25 million. They divided that by the number of House districts. They get an ideal number. And so this ideal is what they shoot for in every district. But there's a 10% window, 5% below, 5% above. So that makes 10%. And as long as they can get the districts within those numbers, that's fine. So sufficient in 2010 meant that there was a county with a population between this number and that number. And guess how many counties had a population within that window? 0. So this first clause of the Texas Constitution applied to 0 counties for the current redistricting. 2010, 2020 now, the population estimate that I'm going to be using here is a little over 29 million. House districts have an ideal around 194,000, and the 10% window is here.
And just to back up, James, the reason no counties fit into that window was because they were either smaller or much larger than those population amounts. That target is a very specific target for counties that just happen not to land within that space.
That's correct. If there were 150 counties in Texas and they all fell between this window, there'd be no redistricting to do. We'd be done. It would be over with. But we have 254 counties, and the population range is under 1,000 all the way up to Harris County, which I think has more people than the state of Oregon. So obviously there's going to be some redistricting to do. Okay, so this was how they did it for 2010. As you can see, that was the state population, the ideal district, the number of districts in the plan. All the districts had to be contiguous. And this that you're seeing now is from the Texas Legislative Council. It's a government document. And the smallest district had 159,000 in it, and the largest district, 176,000. District 142, that was the smallest, is a majority minority, very Democratic district in Houston, or in Harris County, I should say, but I think it's actually in Houston. And the largest district is one that combines the entire county of Parker and the entire county of Wise. And it made it 167, so that was the largest. You'll notice that, I said 5% each way earlier, and the largest was actually slightly over 5%. So I'm going to keep saying 5% on a 10% window, but realize there's a little bit of room to maneuver there, just a tiny bit. That make sense? It's just that when they get it done, the smallest and the largest have to be within 10%.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Following you, James. Great breakdown here.
Got it.
Okay. So ideal for 2020 is 194,000, basically. Here's the window that they're operating in, the 10% window. And these are some estimated populations of various counties. And you'll notice that Ellis is kind of right in the middle of that window now. Ellis is a county just south of Dallas, and it will probably fall into that window. So we'll have a single one county, one district situation. Okay. Midland might get up to that window, 179. And just if the estimate is off by like 5,000 or 6,000, then it would also get one district, be its own district. These other, Johnson's a little small. That's a district that's just south of Fort Worth, and it's a little small, probably won't make it. But I could see Midland kind of sneaking in. These other districts are just way too big. These are the next few counties. So they'll be one district plus a little will go into another district. Okay. So I looked for examples of one county, one district situations, and I had to go all the way back to the 1980s. There were none in the 90s, none in the aughts. And so, and during the 80s, there were 4. And when I first saw that, I thought, oh, they must have cheated. But then I went and did the math, and it just turned out that 4 counties all fit between that window, which is kind of weird. A couple of them were at the very top of the window. Gregg, if it had a couple hundred more people, there would have been a hard decision to make, I think. But 4 counties actually fit in. And these 4 counties have kind of gone in different directions as far as their population. Brazos is now too big for one district. Webb is too big for one district. I think Gregg is too big, but I may be mistaken on that. Potter is definitely too small for just one district. Potter needs extra counties around it. Potter is up here where Amarillo is. Gregg County is, I believe, where Tyler is. Webb where Laredo is, and Brazos is, of course, where Texas A&M, College Station, Bryan Tuck College Station is. But for 30 years, there haven't been any one county, one district situations. Okay, the second of those 4 situations, one district, multiple whole counties. A county with a population smaller than the population needed for a whole district must be kept and combined with one or more contiguous districts to form a district. What does this mean? It basically says they're not supposed to split counties. If a county is small, it goes in with other whole counties. So this is a map of Texas in the 4 situations that we'll be talking about. I spelled multiple wrong here. During the 2010s, there haven't been any counties that have formed just one district. There are all the counties that are in orange there are in districts where there's one district and multiple whole counties. And that's most of the map. It looks like it dominates, but actually only about a quarter of Texans live in those counties. The next category is actually where almost half of Texans live, are in counties where there are multiple whole districts. And you'll notice that in this case, it's mostly big counties: San Antonio, Houston's Harris County, Austin. This is kind of small, Corpus Christi, but then the Metroplex counties as well. And then the last category that we're going to go into is districts with split counties. And so in most of these cases, like Lubbock County actually has too much population for just one district. So it gets one district, and then other counties are added to what's left over. And so that's why there's so many purple counties here, is that they were added to other kind of larger counties to form districts. But anyway, sticking with the one district, multiple counties, we're mostly talking rural areas, right? So when they were putting together the 2010 map, this was the next presidential election coming up. And you'll notice that in Texas, even in 2012, for the most part, the Democratic counties were the large counties that were too big for just one district. And that all the smaller counties where Democrats even had a chance were mostly along the border. So there's kind of this natural dividing line, right, kind of running right here along the border, kind of from Corpus, say, to Midland, where south of that, Democrats have a chance. North of it, it's just all Republican in the rural areas. It's only the big cities and the suburbs where there was much chance of a Democrat winning. So my point here is that because of Texas's geography, that there aren't very many Democrats in these rural counties, except along the border. There aren't very many gerrymandering opportunities here. I mean, these are, no matter what counties you choose out here, it's all going to be Republican. So there's no partisan gerrymandering opportunity at all. Along this line, maybe kinda, but there are some Voting Rights Act restrictions. And so for the most part, where we're talking one district with multiple whole counties, which are usually smaller counties, there's just no partisan gerrymandering opportunity to do. Does that make sense? It's kind of hasn't changed all that much, 2016, 2020. These counties along the border were a little bit less blue than they usually are, less Democratic. And so that will impact some of the decisions that are made. But nonetheless, for most of rural Texas, it's all red. So here's some examples of some counties with where one district, multiple whole counties. The first stat here, the 79%, this just means that Taylor County, which has Abilene, and 79 is over here. So 79% of that district is Taylor County. Tom Green is 65% of this district as far as population goes. Midland makes up 84% of this district, and Ector County, which has Odessa, is about 81% of this district. So there's a tendency out in West Texas for there to be, a major population center. Like here, I've got the pointer on Odessa, and then they group small counties with it to get the population necessary for a whole district. That make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and there's, these are the 2013, the map we're using now is on the left. The previous map for the 2000s is on the right. And you'll notice, District 72, it had San Angelo here, had San Angelo here. It's just a different configuration of small counties that got added to it. 82 was pretty much the same. I think it was exactly the same with Midland. Odessa actually had to have an additional county added to it, Ward County, which is another small county. And Abilene has been not growing as fast as the rest of Texas, so they had to add Jones to it. But for the most part, the representatives from these areas are all from that big city, and the number stays with them.
Okay.
One more decade back. I'm not sure how instructive this is, but so we're talking 2003 versus 1999. This actually Odessa had enough population that it had more population than was sufficient for one district. So a little bit of Ector County had to be in this other district. And kind of same thing for Abilene. Abilene had its county Taylor was actually in two different districts, but it hasn't. These cities haven't grown as fast as the rest of Texas until now. In that, especially Midland and Odessa have really grown quite a bit. And like I mentioned earlier, Midland may be big enough to have its own district this coming time if it grows just a little bit more. The weird thing is that it's slated for, it's estimated at about 179,000. If it gets to 184,000, it's on its own, and it has a district of 184,000. But if it doesn't, then it needs enough counties around it to equal the ideal, which is 194,000.
So just to kind of try to recap some of this, James, what we're seeing in Texas in these rural areas is that, when these districts start, they have to cover multiple counties. As you mentioned, the gerrymandering is really non-existent within those spaces because that's where the people are voting, in that particular part of the state. And the population is kind of set whether they move from a county to the left or a county to the right. It doesn't seem to be making a huge impact on election differences within those spaces. But as a county starts getting bigger population, and let's say they start graduating to that next level to where it's not multiple counties, but it becomes a single county is that district. If then the future population continues to grow even more, and now that single county doesn't have just that single district, but has multiple districts within that county, which I know we'll be getting to, that's when we start seeing that progression of some of those gerrymandering opportunities start to happen. But right now we're at that stage of, the people are still spread out here, and the voting history of the people within this space isn't making really an impact on the gerrymandering concerns that people have in other parts of the state.
Yeah, for the 2020 for the 2020s, this will probably continue to be true. That districts with just whole counties like this, there are just very few gerrymandering opportunities, except for that one kind of line between majority Hispanic counties and Anglo counties. So yeah, there's absolutely no gerrymandering opportunity for a one county, one district situation. There's very limited opportunity for districts with multiple whole counties. But yeah, as we go into these other situations, yeah, there'll be more gerrymandering opportunities.
Thanks, James.
Wanted to talk just kind of give another example of one specific district and kind of how it's changed over the years. And so I picked out District 17 That's represented by John Serrier. He is from, I think I have it down here somewhere, but he's from Caldwell County in Lockhart. So he is from here. And his district is this blue one that looks like this. The district was in the window for population, of course, when they created it, but now it's at 187, 792. So it's still in the window. It's probably still in this window, and it probably could just be left alone if there weren't other factors. Now, one of those factors is that Guadalupe County is probably about 169,000 on its own, and none of the other counties around it. Well, and right now Guadalupe is paired with Wilson County, and Wilson County has an estimated population of 53,000. So this district is really pretty large now. It has probably 222,000 people or so. So that's too large. So Guadalupe can no longer be paired with Wilson. And the only county near Guadalupe that will probably be the right size for it is Gonzales. So whether Republicans want to or not, they don't have any choice. Guadalupe and Gonzales are probably going to be paired together, which means that 17 can't stay exactly like this. It'll have to change a little bit. Right.
So it's a great example of one county's growth, or even multiple counties' growth, but how that domino effect starts happening.
Exactly.
So if I have to carve out this county from this district, well, then I've got to replace that with another county potentially, and then just those domino effects start happening.
Right. And of course, if Gonzales is put in with Guadalupe, then Carnes has to go somewhere else because it's no longer attached to these three. It's not contiguous anymore.
And once again, just to highlight what you're saying, that this is based on population data. These are numbers of people that have to be included. So discussions around, carving out populations based on race and all that kind of stuff that can happen isn't even at this stage, because they just need the numbers. They need whole numbers of these counties to be able to create these districts. And so they're not being selective on which people, they may be selective on which counties as they're trying to figure out those scenarios and everything, but there are these constraints because of these county rules that, the math has to equal. They have to get the math to equal first.
That's correct. Yeah. Just a little bit more about HD 17. Syria won a special election in 2015. Previously, the representative there was Tim Kleinschmidt, who took a job in Sid Miller's department. And so he resigned from the legislature when he took that state job. And so there was a special election, and this is how Republican it is that in the special election, the first round, Democrats only got about 15% there of the vote. Another 14% or so for an independent. But then the two Republicans who were vying against each other went to a runoff, and John Serrier won. Yeah. But before that, it was Kleinschmidt, who was from Lee County. And so Lee County is at the very northern end of this district. Yeah. Before that, in the 2010s, 17 was this yellow. This is how it is now. The yellow district here is 17. But in the 2000s, when Kleinschmidt was first elected, the district actually looked like this. And he, like I say, is from Lee County. So it used to be kind of more in the center, but and then ended up kind of at the top end. In the 2000s, he won in 2006, or I'm sorry, he won in 2008. In 2006, it was actually represented by a Democrat, that county. I'll go back one more time for that and say that this county out here actually was represented by a Democrat until 2006.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's see if I have, oh yeah. So previously, so this is the district in the 2000s I just mentioned. A little bit of Brazos County up there too. But before that, the guy Robbie Cook, who was the Democratic representative during the early 2000s, he had actually represented the 28th district here, these counties. He was from Colorado County, I believe. And so even though he was the incumbent when they redistricted in 2001, he didn't get to keep his number. It changed from 28 to 17. Usually there's a tendency for the numbers to move around with the representatives, or they can stay with the representatives.
Like those good old fashioned jersey changes that we see in sports, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. That's a great analogy.
Team makeup change, and you lost your jersey number. We got this other player we got to include.
Yeah, so he didn't get to keep his number, and part of the reason for that was probably that in 2001, the legislature did not do the redistricting. They couldn't come up with a plan, and so the Legislative Redistricting Board did it. The LRB did it, and then it was changed a little bit by the courts. And so, if the legislature doesn't do it, then you lose these little perks. Somebody else is going to make up the numbers. Okay, so one, the rule was that these small counties have to stay whole, but there was one exception in the 2010 map, which was Henderson County was split. And it was split because the legislature really had no other choice. This is a situation where population has to be within that 10% window. And these are the populations from 2010. And you'll notice Ellis County then had about 150,000 people. The smallest county around it was Hill with 35,000. And that was the window only went up to 176,000. So this was too large. There was no other county that it could be attached to. So you can't just leave it alone. You can't make it too large. So what they did was they split Henderson, and just a little bit, about 10,000 people from Henderson went in with Ellis, and the rest of Henderson was attached to Kaufman. Okay. So even though
in this scenario is where there's potential that we can start seeing some of that creativity used when they're carving different districts to figure out how they can help secure maybe votes from one way or another. There could be some opportunities in these kind of situations.
Could be. This is all red area though, red county. So, there's not a partisan gerrymandering issue here. I guess which part of Henderson to attach to Ellis, it's not like there's a lot of choices. And so, it had to be kind of somewhere over here. So I'm not sure they really had that many choices. It's possible they could have split, maybe Hill or Navarro County or something, but they didn't. So I just want to point out too, then in 2020 coming up, Ellis, like we've said before, will probably have its own district because it'll be in that population in the window between 185 and 204K. Kaufman plus Henderson would be too large. Kaufman has about 141,000, Henderson 83,000. That's just too big. So probably Kaufman's only choice will be to be paired with Van Zandt, and that would give it 197,000 more or less, which is in that window. Likewise, Rockwell County, which is kind of stuck in here for reasons that I'll kind of get to later. Dallas County can't be paired with anything else except under very unusual circumstances. And so Rockwell plus Hunt is, so that's 99 plus, and 106. So that's 205, which is just barely over that window. So if Rockwell can't be paired with Hunt, it may just go in with Collin again. But those are its only two choices, really. Okay, so I think we're kind of, it's these last two types of situations, I'm going to go through a little bit quickly because there is more opportunity for gerrymandering, and a subsequent presentation on opportunities for gerrymandering, I'll go into that with more detail. But now we're talking about we're on to the third situation, one county, multiple districts, and these are multiple whole districts. So the one county, multiple whole districts are the big counties for the most part. Yeah. Okay, so this is going to be the if you're tired, it's unfortunate you've gotten tired now, because this is where the math there's a really odd math issue here.
I'm okay. I'm all right.
So 2010, these are 2010 populations, and you'll notice that Nueces for two whole districts in 2010, 335 was the ideal. The window was here, right? So Nueces fit into that. Denton County, so it has two whole districts that don't go outside the county. It's all Nueces. Same thing with Denton, 4 whole districts, because it fit right into this window. El Paso, you'll notice, was actually on the very low end of that. 796 was the window. El Paso had about 801,000. So it's actually way below. It was actually, right now the districts have very small populations. And so that El Paso didn't grow all that much, so it will probably lose half a representative. Travis County, going in the opposite direction, was kind of in the middle of its window, a little bit on the high side, but it made this window. And then we get into the counties with over 10 districts. And there's a miracle of math whereby these counties with over 10 districts are never have a split district. And the miracle is that as you get from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, in each case, this window grows in size, because now it's like 40% of a whole district. This is 10% of a whole district. This is 20% of a whole district. This is 30%, 60%, 8 would be 80%. You'll notice this window, there's very little outside the two windows, because this is 90% of a whole district is in the window. And when you get to 10, that's when it shrinks to just a very small number, and then the windows actually overlap. So once you get 10 districts, if you're a county that can get 10 districts, then none of them will be split. Yeah. And that's, as far as I know, that's been the situation since 1971. There are some exceptions that I think could come up, but I think it's just fairest to kind of go with that. One thing notice that here, Dallas had 14.1 districts, which means their districts were a little overpopulated. One of the things the legislature probably could have done was to take, instead of taking 10,000 from Henderson, they could have maybe taken 10,000 from Dallas and just some small corner there. I think they could have justified that if they then weren't going to split Henderson. But that's such an unusual situation that I don't think it's worth going into too much detail. Once you get over 10 districts, there's nothing split. Same counties with the 2020 estimates, Nueces, the window has grown and Nueces is under it. So they will probably have to have an additional county added to them. It's pretty close, 364, 369. Denton will get another half district. El Paso will shrink from 5 to 4, plus a portion of another. Travis County is pretty close to the window for 7 whole districts, but still under it. So it'll be either 6 plus or 7. And then, of course, the counties with 10 will probably stay the same. Dallas is, Dallas could shrink another district. It's possible. And Harris, the Texas demographers have Harris a little bit smaller, I think, than the census reports have been. But it looks like Harris will stay the same. Some possibility that it'll gain another district.
So really quick, James, these are the 8 largest counties, correct?
These are not the 8 largest counties.
Oh, okay. These are just counties landing within that math that you're talking about.
These are the counties that are in this specific situation where in 2010, they had a population for whole districts. So, for a number of whole districts, no split districts. Just in one thing I'll say about it is about the Republican redistricting. You'll notice that some of these, this is Tarrant County, they adhered to municipal boundaries for some of these districts. There's no requirement in the Constitution that they do so. And so usually the legislatures, if it's convenient, they do it. If there's no partisan reason to split a municipality, they don't. Nueces County, as I just mentioned, is actually was just in the window for 2 districts last time. Previous to that, during the 2000s, they had actually had 2 districts plus a little bit more. And there was this one district that kind of went northwest along or northeast along the coast, and then 2 that were completely within Nueces. And my understanding is, I couldn't verify this, but my understanding is that 33 was an Hispanic majority district electing a Democrat, and so was 34, and this was Republican. And the districts that they used were 1 Republican and 1 Democratic district. Both are slightly Hispanic majority. They're in the lawsuits that followed. They tried to get, they suggested to the court that they should have drawn, some other Hispanic majority district, but the court said no. The Texas Constitution says whole counties, and so you have to stick with the whole counties. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. One other thing to say about counties with whole districts is that one reason, I wouldn't call this partisan gerrymandering exactly, but in 2009, it's Travis County, there were 2 districts that went out west. And in the current map, there's only 1 district out west. And that's because this is the most Republican area of Travis County. And the representatives for 47 and 48 both had fairly close elections. One was a Republican winner in 47, Democrat winning in 48, Ann Howard actually. And so they basically just did an incumbent protection plan where they made this new district with all the Republicans, and Ann Howard got a very safe district.
Oh, you mean Donna Howard?
Donna Howard, I'm sorry, Donna Howard. Donna Howard got a very safe district.
Okay.
And Mike Workman, I think it was Mike Workman at the time, got this very safe Republican district, or what he thought was safe. In fact, Donna Howard in 2010, just before they did redistricting in her old confines of 48, won by 12 votes out of 50,000 cast.
Wow, that is close.
Yeah, that was a big deal here in Austin for quite a while. With, they did multiple recounts to get there, and it it really just came down right to the wire, just like James just said. And that's kind of a very affluent part of Travis County where that is. Yeah.
If they'd stuck with the old districts, making them like this again, probably the Republican would have, and if the Republican had won in 48 during 2010, and they just tried to keep his district as safe as possible, he probably would have lost in 2012, and Workman probably would have lost earlier in the decade also. So by just making 1 Republican district instead of 2, they probably saved Workman in a few more years. Just want to point out that we're going back to the 70s in this map when Travis County had 4 districts. And you'll notice that even in this map, Nueces County had 3 whole districts plus a portion of a 4th one. And during 1960, Nueces with Corpus County actually had more people than Travis County. Now it's like 3 times as many. So in these whole counties with multiple districts, another constraint on gerrymandering is, and I'll get into this a lot more next time, is that many of these metro counties with huge populations are very Democratic now. This is Travis County, And, you know, if you're trying to draw a Republican map on the east side of Travis County, it's just impossible. You can try to put all these red precincts together if you want, but, you know, that's as good as you can get it. So there's a constraint there. They can't go beyond the borders. Like they can't, the county rule means that you can't go into Bastrop County to add these precincts to these districts. It has to stop right at this county border. Okay. Harris County, kind of similar situation. There's this big chunk of Houston that's very, very blue. You know, majority minority precincts here, and then there's some whiter precincts at both sides. And so because they can't go into other counties, they have to stop right at that border with these House districts, and so that precludes them gerrymandering too much. And one other thing in Harris County is because the white areas, this is the swing from the last two presidential elections, and the white areas were trended Democrat, and the majority minority precincts trended toward Trump. And so that makes it even harder to draw Republican districts out in these areas. It's because they know where things are headed. And so, you know, how many do they want to try to draw? Here's the Metroplex. The map is a little bit tough for what I wanted to kind of get across, but a lot of times these blue areas really stop right at the border. I mean, Rockwall probably can't be combined with Dallas County in any kind of district. So, you know, the most Republicans can try to do is draw one in the northeast corner and then one here. That's what they have right now, or two districts. Representative Meyer and Representative Chen Button represent, and just protecting them is about all they can do in Dallas. Tarrant County, there's a little bit more opportunity, but the big metros, you know, are just so blue that there's just not much Republican can do. And then the last one, districts with split counties, and I'll try not to spend too much time on this because I know we've gone kind of over by time quite a bit, but these are districts that have to have some split counties. And on the map, those are the purple ones. And so about a quarter of Texas lives in these districts, more or less. It'll probably be a little bit more of that in the next, during the 2020s. And I'm going to kind of glide past this really quickly, but I'll just give a couple of examples. Williamson County, for instance, had about 423,000 people. So these are the 2010 windows, and it was between these two. Couldn't have a whole district, so it's two whole districts plus a portion of Williamson got added to into two more rural areas, two more rural counties. Same counties that are split now. Most of the ones that are split now will probably be split again. Some possible examples: the estimated population of Collin County is probably above the window for 5 whole districts. May get a little bit of it goes into another district, maybe combined with Rockwall. And then Hidalgo and Cameron, they kind of combined last time. They'll probably do the same thing again. There's one district that spans both counties, and that worked out pretty well. They'll probably have to add another county to that district, but that's probably what they'll end up doing again. Fort Bend is actually just barely above this window for 4 whole ones, so it might have part of it going to another county. Montgomery and Williamson are pretty much at the top end of the 3. And Brazoria, which last time was split, will probably have 2 whole districts, but you're just Brazoria. Bell is pretty close to getting 2 whole districts. When they do these districts where there's a county that's split, like this one, it's kind of a little bit hard to see, but there's actually 2 districts here in Laredo. There's one that's just the city of Laredo, and that's the red lines here, House District 42. And then there's another one that's like excess population from Webb County added to other counties nearby. And you'll notice that they tried to put all of Laredo, or as much of Laredo as they could, into one district. So trying to keep municipalities whole. This is probably bad for Democrats in this area because the rural areas are trending a little bit more Republican. And so if they actually split Laredo in two, that would probably be better for Democrats. But that's not what they've done before, and there's no obligation to Republicans to do that. Conversely, District 84 is just all within Lubbock. And notice here it kind of follows some of the boundaries of Lubbock. This has been trending a little bit Democratic. Has a big university, kind of a growing number of Hispanic voters. And so it's not going to flip very soon, but it, maybe the end of the decade, if things kind of go well for Democrats. Likewise, Republicans are not obligated to put all of Lubbock into one district, but there may be some Voting Rights Act rules that make it a little bit more difficult for them to split the Democratic parts of Lubbock. This is a situation where putting, keeping one district all within Lubbock is actually good for Democrats. And then we're almost done here. Hays County, I just wanted to mention, is right now is part of 45 with Blanco County. The only thing we know about the 45th district next time is that most of Hays County will not be paired with Blanco County. Hays has increased in population. I think it's the fastest growing county in the state. Last time it had to have another county added to it to form a whole district. This time it's going to be about 38,000 above what it needs for a whole district. So all of Hays, except for maybe 38,000 people, will be in the 45th district. Now, and the 45th district was very close last time. Aaron Zwiener won by about 1,000 votes. The Blanco part of it, even though there's only 11,000 people, they turned out, and in 2020, Blanco County voted for the Republican by huge numbers. We know Blanco is not going to be part of Hays, so that looks like, makes it look like Aaron Zwiener is going to have, just Hays County to worry about, and so that looks good for her. And maybe not, and that will take us to our next presentation, gerrymandering opportunities, where I will be talking about Hays County again.
And just to reemphasize for everybody, that's what this conversation was about, is looking at those county constraints, that there are these rules based on that court case back in 1971, was it, right?
Well, it's the Constitution. Texas Constitution has the rules.
Okay, so the rules are now in the Constitution. That the counties have these requirements for making these districts. We have to abide by these county rules so that there is some kind of constraint for building these maps, so that, like you said, you can't take 10,000 people from this part of the city in this Texas and go all the way across Texas and take another 10,000 people. That them being connected, the population math within those counties determine whether it needs to stay within that county or if it can be split, and that these county constraints do help prevent some opportunities for gerrymandering that would otherwise be much more available to any leader of any party to carve out the districts that they want. And so the county constraints don't fix everything. It doesn't solve every problem, but it does help prevent some of the gerrymandering that could happen if they weren't there.
That's correct. Yes. And I'll go further and say that I know a lot of people in Indivisible and people who care about gerrymandering would like to do some kind of redistricting commission. That would certainly help, and that would certainly be good. But it really matters what rules those commissions are operating under. Really impacts their work quite a bit from one state to another. And sometimes just changing the rules and letting the legislators do their own districts works just fine. So as we go into other topics in Texas redistricting, one of the things I'll be saying is that if the county rule were applied to state senate districts and congressional districts, that would be that would get us a long way toward not having such a gerrymandered map.
Yeah, and this is another great thing to point out, is that this conversation was all around Texas House districts.
Mhm.
The redistricting process is going to happen at multiple levels. There's multiple maps that need to be drawn within our governments. This is the Texas House. You referenced there's going to be the Texas Senate map. There's the U.S. congressional map. And then local governments are also doing some drawing maps of city councils or things like that around this. And one thing also to emphasize is the numbers that you're using right now are all projections. These are all estimates.
The 2020 numbers are estimates, yes.
Yeah. And
one thing I'll just point out on using the county rule for the state senate and for congressional districts is that the way it works in Texas, we don't have an opportunity to have a citizen-led referendum and constitutional amendment. Other states do, but all of our constitutional amendments have to go through the legislature. So the legislature would have to approve of an independent redistricting commission, which means you're asking the legislators to take away a key power that they have that's important to them. And I think that's kind of, it's hard to convince them of that. But we have this county rule in Texas. They know how it works. They're familiar with how it works. And if you just had the county rule, but they still could draw the districts otherwise, then they might be amenable to that. I could see that passing, and both Republicans and Democrats. It's not like it really favors one party or the other necessarily. It just prevents gerrymandering by whoever's in charge. So I think this would be something we could try to convince the legislators to do, is to have the county rule in effect for both state senate and congressional districts. Keep in mind, of course, that one of the things the county rule does is it stabilizes districts. Every legislator is also kind of concerned that his or her district could just be gerrymandered, or even their own party could basically change the district so much that they can't win. And so anything that stabilizes those lines is good for them too.
yeah, and with the census data coming out, people are predicting around April, people are going to be generating these maps based on these projections. There's a likely chance that they'll be pretty accurate, but the real census data can cause an impact in terms of what is being projected for some of these maps, and could contribute to this being delayed because the numbers, like we talked about earlier, the domino effect of these county rules, if they're not within that window, they go above or beyond, then the domino effects after that really will cause a lot of decisions to be made that could be just a couple, or it could be several that need to be considered and made. And so everyone's waiting for those census numbers to come out because they really want to see where those numbers land. The other thing I was going to ask you, James, is when we look at the voter turnout for 2020 and the record-breaking number of votes that Texas had in this election, is that's another data point for them to be able to look at as they're able to make some of these decisions when those opportunities arise to carve out districts or to be able to see which lines they're going to draw based on these precincts, because they have even more voting data around the population within those places. And that could be, I don't know how significant it's going to be, but it could be something that contributes to some of that decision making, that we have much more data on Texas voters than we've had previously.
Yeah. Yes, this is true. Yeah.
Well, if you don't mind stopping sharing real quick, James, I want to ask Robert if he has any final thoughts or questions around this first part in the series that we had, which thanks, James, for this presentation. But Robert, do you want to give you a chance to chime in?
Well, yeah, just real briefly. I know that once the census comes out, the Legislative Council has a huge role in going ahead and taking that in, developing, okay, this is maybe a pro forma map that you could look at that just, all it does is it satisfies the county rule in some kind of, statistical way. But then once you start going into the legislative decision making, just in terms of the county rule, how much time and effort do you think the legislature has to spend or will have to spend just in terms of satisfying the county rule and drawing districts? Is that going to be a big time and effort factor for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think I would say, first of all, that these estimates are probably pretty good. And so if the Legislative Research Council could probably go ahead and draw up maps based on the estimates. And then once the final figures come in, if there's a problem, they can go back and make adjustments.
Okay, so that they'll have, what that means then is that the legislature will have time, even before the census comes in. The legislature will have some time before April to start looking at some estimates that the Legislative Council will be providing them. Mm-hmm. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. And in fact, I didn't put it up for this presentation, but maybe I'll lead with that next time. On the web, there's actually a timeline that they used in 2010, which includes some of what they knew before 2010 happened. But then in 2010, the dates and what the state of Texas was doing, including preparing maps, getting ready for it, et cetera. And then when the census came in, and how they had, what the next set of maps that they released, et cetera. So I would say that probably the timeline for 2010 will resemble what's going to happen next. It's just that the lateness of the census data may make things a little difficult.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Cool.
Well, we definitely want to thank everybody for joining us, whether you've followed live or you're watching it after the fact. If you have any questions or you would like to know a little bit more information, let us know in the comments. And that way we can get you that information or point you in the direction where that information can be obtained. A huge thanks to James for helping us kick off this series, Topics in Texas Redistricting. Once again, this was part 1, the county rule constraints on Texas House gerrymandering. And we'll be having part 2, opportunities in gerrymandering, here in the future. So stay tuned. Thanks everybody. And we hope you enjoy these final hours of 2020 and enjoy the new year.
Thanks for being a patient audience.
All right. Thank you, James. Thanks, Alex.